Erev Tov, good evening, everyone. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Vayechi. We're going to do Os Zion, section 7 in the sefer. That's Daf Tuf Mem Tes. We're going to take a look at two psukim before we start that the Zera Shimshon is going. These psukim are psukim Zera Shimshon is going to discuss. One pasuk, the first pasuk we're going to look at is from Parshas Vayigash, and it is Perek Mem Vav pasuk Lamed in Sefer Bereshis, and this pasuk comes from the time period when Yaakov Avinu has brought his entire family. Base Yaakov has all come down from Eretz Canaan at Yosef's invitation and Yosef's insistence, and they show up in Eretz Mitzrayim, and Yosef comes to greet them. And here's what Yaakov says when he sees Yosef: Vayomer Yisrael el Yosef, and Yisrael, and that's of course Yaakov's new name, says to Yosef, O Musa ha'po'am, I can die, or I will die at this time, acharei ra'osi es ponecha, after I have seen your face, ki odcha choy, because you are still alive. Okay, so most people, when they read that pasuk, they take it not to mean that Yaakov Avinu is actually talking about dying, or certainly not saying I want to die, but rather he's in its expression of joy, which is I can die in peace now. I can die now that I've been reunited with you, now that I know you were alive all these years. Now that I've been able to see you again, I can die, so to speak, a happy man or a contented man. That's the pasuk in Vayigash. The next pasuk comes from our Parsha of Vayechi, and it's the second pasuk in the Parsha, Perek Mem Zayin pasuk Chaf Tes. The pasuk reads, Vayikruvu Yemei Yisrael Lamus, the days of Yaakov Avinu came to die. The day of his death approached. Vayikra livno li Yosef, and he called to his son Yosef. Vayomer lo, and he said to him, Im no matzasi chen be'einecha, if I have now found favor in your eyes, sim no yodcha tachas yirechi, place please your hand under my thigh, which as we know was a way of taking an oath. So he's saying to his son Yaakov, saying to Yosef, I want you to take an oath, ve'asisa imodi chesed ve'emes, and do with me kindness and truth. Al no sikbareni b'Mitzrayim. Do not bury me in Mitzrayim. And of course, that's a very famous pasuk, and Yosef, of course, readily agrees and commits not to bury Yaakov when he dies in Mitzrayim. And as we know, Yosef arranges for a huge funeral procession to go up after Yaakov Avinu dies and to bury him in Maras HaMachpelah. Those are the two psukim. Now let's move into the Zera Shimshon. Again, this is Os Zion, section 7 in Parshas Vayechi. Medrash Rabbah. The Zera Shimshon starts with a piece from the Medrash Rabbah. Al nosik b'reinim b'Mitzrayim. So the Medrash Rabbah comments on the pasuk that we just read. Please do not bury me in the land of Egypt. Bishvilcha yoradati leMitzrayim. The Medrash Rabbah says that Yaakov Avinu said to Yosef, it was because of you that I came down to Egypt. Bishvilcha amarti al Musa ha'pa'am. And it was because of you that I said, I can die now that I have seen you. Ad kan Lashono, until here is a quote from the Medrash Rabbah. Koshe, this is difficult. Ma inyan elu hadivorim, what connection is there between these things? Lahachriach, to compel Yosef shelo yikbaruhu b'Mitzrayim, not to bury Yaakov in Egypt. V'lama hutzrachu dafka shtei ta'amim elu. And why did Yaakov feel the need to specifically mention these two things in his effort to persuade and convince his son Yosef not to bury him in Mitzrayim, but rather to go through what Yaakov knew would be a very difficult, very well-nigh impossible process to get permission for Yosef to leave Egypt, for the viceroy to leave Egypt and to lead an entourage all the way back to Eretz Canaan to bury Yaakov. So why did Yaakov, the Zera Shimshon says, why did Yaakov mention these two things? The idea that Bishvilcha yaradati leMitzrayim, Yaakov said, because of you, Yosef, I came down to Egypt, and because of you, when I saw you, I said, I can die at this time. What does that have to do with Yaakov's effort to convince Yosef to ultimately bury him back in Eretz Canaan? So it's a very straightforward question on this little piece, this small piece in the Medrash Rabbah, and the Zera Shimshon, as is his custom, is going to, in the next paragraph, give us 4 pieces of information or 4 building blocks, and then use them to construct an answer to his question and an explanation to the piece in the Medrash Rabbah. So prepare now, you can prepare yourself now in this next paragraph to get 4 kind of discrete, separate pieces of information. And then he'll put it all together for us. V'nakdim ma shepirish Rashi, Zera Shimshon says, let us begin with what Rashi Olav Hashalom explains. Al pasuk, on the pasuk, Vayikro livno Yosef, that he called to his son to Yosef, which is the pasuk we read a moment ago, right at the beginning of Vayechi. Rashi says, Lefi shehaya sipek biyodo la'asos. This because Yosef had the ability, had sufficient power and authority to do this, meaning Yosef was the son, the only son amongst Yaakov Avinu's children who had the power and the authority to, and the prestige to be able to bring off the burial of Yaakov back in Eretz Canaan. Only Yosef could do that. The other brothers had no political power and had no authority. Yosef was second in authority to the Paro. So Yosef had the power. By the way, this text of Rashi that the Zera Shimshon quotes is kind of a paraphrase. That's not exactly the words that Rashi on Chumash uses, but it's the same idea that Yaakov turned to Yosef and said, please don't bury me in Egypt, bury me back in Canaan, because Yosef was the only son who could actually carry this mission out. So Yaakov chose to speak to him about this. Od Kos, that's piece of information number 1. Od Kosav Ashach, and the Shach in his commentary on Chumash writes, Shemin Hadin Hoya Sheyelech Yosef leEretz Canaan la'aviv. It would have been appropriate in Min Hadin, it would have been more halachically correct for Yosef to leave Egypt and to go to his father and to greet him and to accompany him down to Egypt. And it was not appropriate for Yosef to say to Yaakov, come down and to Egypt, and when you come here, I can greet you and take care of you. That's not the way a son should treat a father. The son should go to the father, as opposed to telling, especially an elderly father, to telling the elderly father, you come to me. No, Yosef should have gone, the Shach says, Yosef should have gone to Eretz Canaan. Ella bad lefisha hayamelech. Yosef was like the king, second in command to the king. Lo hayayochol lazov hamalchus. And so he wasn't able, Yosef was not able to forsake, to leave the kingship, to leave, he couldn't just leave Egypt, right? When a person at the level of power that he had can't just say, oh, well, I'm going to take a few weeks off and leave. The whole country would collapse. So Yosef could not leave. And that's why he had to say to his father, I can't come to you. I want you and the whole family to come to me. V'zehu pshat hakosav, and this is the explanation of the pasuk when Yosef says to the brothers, Samani Elokim la'adon lechol Mitzrayim. Hashem has made me a master of over all of Egypt. Rudo Elai, come down to me. This is what Yosef says to the brothers after he reveals his identity to them. And he says, go back home, gives them all the provisions, go back home and get Yaakov and get everyone, get the entire family, and Rudo Elai, come down to me and I'll be able to take care of you and give you a beautiful place to live and supply you with food. So the Shach says that pasuk is very instructive and very important. Why? Klomar, because what Yosef meant to say was, Dafka bishvil shesamani, specifically and only because Hashem made me a ruler in Egypt, ani omer lecha ruda. That's why I'm saying to the brothers and to my father, come down to me. Halav hachi, if it wasn't for that, if Yosef says, if I was not a ruler, if I was not a person in such a unique position of power, then I would have come to you. So the message that that Yosef told the brothers to bring back to the father was, of course, under all normal circumstances, I would come to you, father. But since I can't leave Egypt because of my position, Rida Eli, I need to ask you to beseech you to come to me, and I will take care of you and the family. So that's the second point that the Zera Shimshon wants us to keep in mind as we go further. Od Kosav Hazera B'Yorech. Another point was written in the sefer Zera B'Yorech Chelik Beis, the second volume of Parsha Zu, on this Parsha Vayechi, B'Shem HaZohar, in the name of the Zohar. She'im haya Yaakov nikbar b'Mitzrayim. The Sefer says, quoting the Zohar, that if Yaakov Avinu had been buried in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, lo hischil hashibud la'olam, the servitude, the oppression and the servitude of Bnei Yisrael would never have started. So this is a very unusual and important, vital piece of information. According to this, Yaakov Avinu needed to be buried, so to speak, back in Eretz Canaan for Hashem's plan of the Avdus of the Jewish people, as was demonstrated back to Avram Avinu and the Bris Bein HaBesarim, for all of this to take place, for all of the servitude and the oppression of Bnei Yisrael, which was part of Hashem's plan that he had described to Avram Avinu, for all of it to happen, Yaakov could not be buried in Mitzrayim. Yaakov Avinu had to be buried back in Eretz Canaan. Why? Because had he been buried in Mitzrayim, then the zechus, the merit of his presence there, the power and the impact of Yaakov Avinu's body being buried in Eretz Mitzrayim would have made it that oppression and this enslavement of the Jewish people could never have taken place. And now we come to the fourth and the final building block, Ve'od Isa b'Meforshim, and also it is stated in the commentators, Shebischus Yosef, in the merit of Yosef, Shegodar Atzmo min ha'erva, he separated himself, he made a fence, a gader is a fence, he made a fence, he fenced himself off from sexual immorality. That's a reference, of course, to his refusal to be with Ashes Potiphar, with the wife of his master Potiphar in Egypt. Because in the merit that Yosef did that, Nigdaru Kol Ha'anashim, all of the men of the Jewish people had the power and the ability to separate themselves from getting involved in sexual immorality. So when Yosef did what he did, it did not only have a powerful effect on his own future and his own spiritual development, it also had an impact and a powerful effect on Bnei Yisrael as a whole. And B'schus, in the merit of what Yosef did, the men of Bnei Yisrael, when they were presented with temptations of erva, of arayas, of sexual morality, they were able to restrain themselves as well. So Yosef was both a role model and kind of a mashpia. His influence had a tremendous impact on Bnei Yisrael. So those are the four pieces of information that the Zera Shimshon is now going to use and weave together to answer his original question, which simply was, what did the Medrash Rabbah mean when it quoted Yaakov Avinu as having said to Yosef as support for his request for Yosef to take him back to Eretz Canaan for his burial? He said, you're the reason I came to Egypt, and you're the reason I said those words, Amusa Hapam, I can die now, I can die now. How does that connect? Okay. Bottom of the first column. V'zehu be'er hamedrash. And this is the explanation. Now that we have those four pieces of knowledge, those four building blocks, now this is the explanation of the Medrash Rabbah. Omar Yaakov said to Yosef, min haro'oi, it would have been appropriate from the perspective of what's appropriate, you should have come to me in Eretz Yisrael. And not I should come to you to Egypt. That's what we said before. That was the point that we saw about that the Shach made. But because you were the king, you're a ruler, I was required to come down to Egypt in order to be with you. Yaakov says, I understand that I could not say to you as I normally would, you're my son, you come to me. I couldn't say that because you can't leave Egypt because of your position. And therefore I say to you, Hoil sha'ata, we're going up to the top of the second column. Hoil sha'ata melech, since you are in fact the ruler, v'yesh sipek biyodecha, and you have the power and the authority in your hands, al nosik bareni b'mitzrayim, don't bury me in Egypt. V'zehu, and this is the meaning of the line in the Medrash Rabbah piece, b'shvilcha yaradati l'mitzrayim, because of you I came down to Egypt. So let's pause here because the Zera Shimshon has explained using building blocks 1 and 2. That's the comment that Rashi made and the comment that the Shach made in his commentary on Chumash. He used those two to answer the first, to explain the first piece in the Medrash Rabbah. The first piece in the Medrash Rabbah said that Yaakov said to Yosef, don't bury me in Egypt. Why? Bishvilcha yaradati l'mitzrayim. Because of you, I came down to Egypt. What does that mean? So now we understand. What it means is Yaakov said to Yosef, you should have come to visit me in Eretz Canaan and accompanied me down to Eretz Mitzrayim. You didn't do that, and I accepted it because you're the ruler. For that for that very reason that you are the ruler, and I had to come to you, now I'm asking you to, and I'm coming to you as opposed to any of the other brothers and anyone else in the family. I'm coming dafka to you, Yosef, because you are the ruler. You have the power, and you're the only one who has the power to be able to accomplish what I want to accomplish and to commit to me, to take a vow and to commit not to bury me, not to allow me to be buried in Egypt, but rather to bring me back to Eretz Canaan. So we see what the Medrash Rabbah, how it's explaining Yaakov's words to Yosef. Now let's continue. V'im tomar, and if you say, this is Ke'ilu Yaakov Avinu still speaking. Yaakov says to Yosef, and if you say, Sha'ata rodze lekavrani b'Mitzrayim, you dafka want to bury me in Egypt, kedei shelo yaschil hagolos, in order that the terrible oppression and servitude of exile will not start. Remember, that was one of the points that we saw, that if Yaakov Avinu had been buried in Egypt, this was in the Zera B'Yorech quoting the Zohar, if Yaakov Avinu had been buried in Egypt, then the Golus never would have started. So Yaakov says to you, I know what you'd be thinking, Yosef. You specifically want to bury me in Egypt, and then the suffering that's been foretold and that's been foreseen for the Jewish people will never start, because in the merit of my being buried in Mitzrayim, if you think that, halo adarabba, just the opposite. I want you to think just the opposite. Ani amarti, I said, O Musa hapam, I can die now, kisheroisi fonecha, now that I have seen your face. Klomar, what did this mean to say? What did I mean when I said those words? Kisheroisi bizohar panecha, when I saw the shine, the spiritual light coming from your face. Shelocha tasa be'erva, that told me you did not sin with sexual immorality. The Yodati, and I knew ki b'schuscha yihiyu nitzulim kol Yisrael. I knew that not only did you refrain from sexual immorality, but in your merit, this saved the Jewish people from getting involved with erva and sexual transgressing and sexual immorality. Amarti, then I said on Musa Hapam. Then I said, I can die now. What did I mean? Kedei sheyaschil hagolus miyad. I want the exile to begin immediately. Shaharei tam hagolus hu mipnei. The whole reason of the exile, Yaakov Avinu understood and explained to Yosef was, Shehi efshar lezakos benachlas Eretz Yisrael. It will be impossible for the Jewish people to attain the merit, to acquire, to inherit the land of Eretz Yisrael, im lo al yidei yisurin, if not through suffering, the hainu hagolos, which is the exile in Egypt, and exile with servitude and enslavement. Not just an exile in Egypt, meaning, look, the Jewish people are in Egypt, they're not in Eretz Canaan, so it's an exile, so Golos is happening. No, Yaakov Avinu says there is, as was, again, going back to the Bris Bein HaBesarim, as Hashem had told Avram back so long ago, they're going to be enslaved, they're going to be oppressed in a foreign land. So Yaakov says that has to happen, because without suffering, the Jewish people will never be able to acquire Eretz Yisrael. Inami, and also, Shelo hayu yicholim lekabel haTorah. the Jewish people will not be able to experience Kabbalas HaTorah. They will not be able to receive the Torah at Har Sinai ad sheyiztachachu, until they become purified bechor habarzel, in the purification. I forget the word. Sorry. In the purification pot, or the purification cauldron. Crucible, that's the word. The crucible of purification of the iron, kinoda, as is well known. Chazal have a saying, and this is what the Zera Shimshon is referring to, that the experience of the Jewish people and the suffering of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim purified them and made them and raised them to the level of being able to experience Kabbalas HaTorah, the reception of the Torah on Har Sinai. So Yaakov Avinu says, I want, my goal, I'm looking at the big picture. My goal is let the Golus start and let the Jewish people experience this suffering, because it has to happen. And Chas v'sholom, no one would ever want the Jewish people to be enslaved or to suffer in any way. But because this has to happen, let's get it started. So as quickly as possible, the Jewish people can come out of this suffering and this slavery and be able to receive the Torah and then ultimately go to Eretz Yisrael. And let's get that process started. And Yaakov says that can only happen once I die and once I'm buried, not in Egypt, but once I'm buried back in Eretz Canaan. Then the whole destiny, so to speak, of the Jewish people, of the enslavement and the oppression, can begin and then can end, and then the Jewish people can move to the heights of Har Sinai and Eretz Yisrael. V'Yaakov hayirotze lemaher zman Kabbalas HaTorah. And Yaakov wanted to quicken, wanted to hurry and bring about the time of the receiving of the Torah, v'nachal as Eretz Yisrael, and the inheritance of Eretz Yisrael. Umishum hachi, and because of this, hayirotze lemaher techilas hagolos. He wanted to hurry to begin the start, the onset of the golus, a golus of suffering and oppression. And so that's what he meant. The Zera Shimshon is saying that's what Yaakov really meant when he said amusa hapam. He didn't mean, or he didn't only mean, Yaakov didn't only mean, Yosef, I'm so happy and overjoyed that I've seen your face. Now I can die content. Now I can die a happy man. That is not only what he meant. He meant something very, very deep and profound, which was, Yosef, now that I've seen the shine and the purity of your face, and I know you have not succumbed to sexual immorality, and this will be a zchus for the whole Jewish people to be able to go through the Golus experience without succumbing to sexual immorality. Now that I know that, I'm ready to die as quickly as possible. Why? Because only with my death, Yaakov Avinu says, and my burial back in Eretz Canaan, can the oppression and suffering and true Golus begin that will lead to the Jewish people leaving Mitzrayim, going to Har Sinai, and ultimately to Eretz Yisrael. And Yaakov Avinu wanted all of that to happen as quickly as possible. Next paragraph. Ubishlama. And we understand imlo haya Yosef goder atzmo min ha'avera. If Yosef would not have refrained from and separated himself from the sin of sexual immorality, Yosef tov haya shelo yashchil hagolus. Then it would have been better for the Golus never to start in Egypt. Meaning, it would have been better for Yaakov Avinu to be buried dafka in Egypt, so that the suffering would not start there, unless Yosef had refrained. Why? Because if Yosef hadn't refrained, then the Jewish people themselves would have succumbed to the immorality of Egypt, as we'll see now. Kedei shelo yitmeu Yisrael b'Mitzrayim, in order that the Jewish people should not assimilate amongst the Egyptians, v'yiyu ne'evadim, and they would become lost there. They'd become destroyed in Egypt, bi'isur ha'arayos, with sexual sins of sexual immorality. Shaharei Mitzrayim, because the Egyptians shetufei zimahem, they are immersed, they are sunken, they were immersed and sunken in sexual immorality. V'lo go'al HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael Mitzrayim, and Hashem did not ultimately redeem the Jewish people and save them from the servitude in Egypt. Ella, except bishvil shahayu gedurim min ha'erva, because they separated themselves and they did refrain from these sins of sexual immorality. V'ru'uyim lahashras shchina, and they were fit and appropriate to have an experience of the dwelling of the Shechina, when they came to Har Sinai and when they traveled through the Midbar. Hashem was with them. Hashem protected them. And there were special and unique signs of Hashem's protection around them. They never would have merited all of the miracles and all of the special presence of Hashem unless they had refrained from sexual morality, and they only were able to attain that level because of what Yosef did by setting the path for them and himself refusing to be with Ashes Potiphar. So what the Zera Shimshon is doing is he's showing how all the pieces fit together. When Yaakov Avinu said to Yosef, I see now I can die now that I've seen your face, he means I see the spirituality, the spiritual shining of your face. You didn't give in to temptation. This tells me the Jewish people will be able to refrain and not give in to temptation. Let's start the Gullus. The Jewish people can handle it. They can survive spiritually, and they'll be able to come out and merit the level of Hashras HaShechina, of the Shechina being present with them. Dichsiv, as the pasuk in Tehillim says, Shesham olu shvatim shivteka. There the tribes went up. This pasuk is a reference to Yerushalayim. The tribes went up to Yerushalayim, and they were the tribes of Hashem. And the Zera Shimshon is only giving that little reference to a Gemara in Kedushin, which talks about the fact that Jewish men have to be very careful who they marry, and Jewish women have to be careful who they marry, because you should always marry someone who has had no part and no role in any kind of sexual immorality, and everyone's lineage should be pure, and there should be no taint of sexual immorality in the yichus, in the lineage. And that's what that Gemara in Kedushin is referring to. And that's what the Zera Shimshon is talking about the Bnei Yisrael in Mitzrayim, how they were very careful about those things. V'lochein Omar, and therefore Yaakov Avinu said, Bishvilcha amusa hapa'am, because of you I said the words, now I can die. Ubishvil osa hatam mamish, and because of that exact reason, al nasik bareni b'Mitzrayim, don't bury me in Egypt. If you had succumbed to sexual morality, and had you been with Ashes Potiphar, Yaakov said to Yosef, then I would say to you, bury me in Egypt. I would tell you to definitely bury me in Egypt, because by burying me in Egypt, you would prevent the suffering and oppression that the Jewish people are going to undergo here, which they would not be able to withstand. They would assimilate into Egyptian culture. They would give in to the temptations of Arias, of sexual morality, and they would never be able to come out of Egypt and go to Har Sinai and merit Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, what I'm saying to you, Yosef, is now that I see your face and I see you did refrain, and I know the Jewish people will be able to refrain, and they'll be able both physically and spiritually to stay holy during their time in Eretz Yisrael and be purified, in Eretz Mitzrayim, and be purified during their time of suffering in Egypt, then I say, let's move ahead with everything. Don't bury me in Egypt, bury me back in Eretz Yisrael, so the Golus process can start and we can move everything. Everything can get moving for the ultimate goal of the Jewish people being redeemed from slavery, leaving Egypt, going to Har Sinai, receiving the Torah, and ultimately meriting to be able to go to Eretz Yisrael and inherit the land for the future of the Jewish people. So the Zera Shimshon has taken us from a very small little comment to a little small piece in the Medrash Rabbah, and he's explained to us the tremendous depth of what was happening there, which tells us the depth of the conversation between Yaakov Avinu and Yosef, and how ultimately we now understand what Yaakov meant when he talked to Yosef about, I'm coming specifically to you, Yosef, and talking to you and asking you to take the commitment and the vow not to bury me here, but only to bury me in Eretz Yisrael. And only that way could the future that Hashem had ordained for the Jewish people come to fruition. Yasher koch to everyone who participated tonight and who joined us tonight. And we look forward again, God willing, B'ezras Hashem, to starting Sefer Shmos next time.